The first area that will surprise and confuse gamers when it comes to Hideo Kojima's latest game is that of its setting and world. Set in America, this by no means looks anything like the America you would be expecting to see in any medium. This bleak, barren and mostly empty world is more reminiscent of Iceland than it is of the United States. From its landscapes covered in jagged rocks, high mountain ranges that extend up into the sky with their snow-covered peaks and blanketed in thick fog at times, to its waterfalls and streams which crisscross through the wide-open valleys, whilst other times players will be making their way over almost Mars-like landscape. The world of Death Stranding proposes its own questions by simply looking at the setting. The whole game is a sight to behold, with its beautiful visuals both out in the open world and in many of the cutscenes which players will be watching. Even though the world is large and mostly empty, Kojima has made sure that there is a variety when traversing this huge game, from the more lush areas to deep snow to almost black barrenness areas where any sort of life would struggle to survive and grow, through to the mystery beaches which players will find themselves on. Each area has the same level of detail as each other, but each will also bring about their own challenges, which I'll get to later. From its detailed textures and character models, the developers have given Death Stranding a very unique look, and even though the game world is mostly empty, it continues to impress from a technical standpoint from the beginning all the way until the closing credits. Character models are highly detailed at all times, even during regular gameplay or short cutscenes. The detail of the skin and water as our characters take showers, or the way his clothes fold and contort based upon his movements as he walks or runs. The ridiculous amount of cargo your player can carry on his body is also done well, in that they look like bulky, heavy pieces of equipment, and they do interact and move based upon our movements and as we traverse over the different terrain. The intricate details of dirty skin, facial hair, and the very subtlest of movements when it comes to character, eye, and mouth movement are some of the best I've seen in any game. Lighting in the game also looks fantastic, but subtle, where we see the glow of light reflecting off a distant stream or off the snow. But due to the bleakness of the landscape, lighting is often never the focus of the scene. There are little to no huge explosions or large neon signs. This isn't a brightly lit modern city, so its use is only to enhance what we are already seeing. The soft glow through the clouds, or when players see the small lights from a zipline or generator along the horizon. Seeing tears gently glisten as they fall down a character's cheek when they are in the middle of an intense scene. It all looks amazing, and the direction of the cutscenes are always at a high standard, which keeps you invested in this world and the struggle of the characters. The indoor environments are lit simply without being overly impressive, but the indoor sections and city areas of Death Stranding is the game's weakest aspect when it comes to the world. When we are out in the open or on the beaches is when the graphics and atmosphere are at their peak, but indoor environments are cold and more copy and paste than what I was hoping. Each of the different buildings you head into in each of the different cities all look the same, with little to no differences at all. Having each be overly elaborate and lavish would not be in keeping with the game's story and what it's attempting to focus on, but you would think that there would be at least some differences. There are much smaller settlements, and I use that term very loosely. They are scattered around the map, but these indoor environments are tiny and consist of mostly a single room with a terminal to interact with. When the expansiveness of the world, its atmosphere, and just how beautiful and detailed it all is seems so impressive, it's these indoor places that let the world down overall. Trekking across snow-covered mountains, crossing running streams, continuing over rocky landscapes as the rain starts to pelt down is all so immersive, but the destinations are often lacking anything to look forward to apart from dropping off your cargo and progressing through the main story. Players take on the role of Sam, a courier who rejoins the Bridges organization, a company who employs porters who deliver packages and goods to the different cities after the catastrophic event known as the Death Stranding. These cities rely on the deliveries in order to function, and the porters are those who brave the dangers of the world in order to deliver what's needed. And as you deliver the packages both for the main missions and side quests, you'll be traversing and overcoming the different types of terrain, such as the huge number of rocks that are scattered about everywhere. And geez, the amount of rocks in this game, sometimes it felt like it was a sick joke from the developer to see how many they could cram into it and then give you access to a bike and a truck to drive into all of these rocks. I'll expand on world traversal later, but the main threats for players in Death Stranding are that of the environmental effects such as timefall and the BTs, short for beached things. Timefall is damaging rain which will degrade your cargo over time unless you can shield yourself from it, so it's important that players move through it as quickly as possible or wait it out. Human enemies known as mules are also a threat out in the open world, but also give you opportunities to steal equipment such as trucks and also resources from their settlements. But the other more serious threat is that of BTs, which are apparitions or supernatural beings that Sam will sense when nearby thanks to BB, the bridge baby, which is strapped to his chest. When moving through these areas with BTs, players will need to sneak about whilst trying to avoid them and the ensuing conflict. I'm not going to go in depth too much about BTs and the whole backstory of them, as finding out more and more information surrounding them and the world is best discovered in the game from the large amounts of notes and files which can be read. But the main part of what Death Stranding has you do is delivering cargo to settlements across America and getting them hooked up to the chiral network, a means of communication similar to that of the internet and allowing each settlement and city to communicate once again. When Sam gets these places back online, then it opens up new options for you which enhances the gameplay the more you play. Players are able to construct simple objects such as new boots for Sam which will wear over time, but you'll also be able to build infrastructure which makes traversing the world that much easier, but also being able to construct objects to protect your cargo, recharge your various power skeletons, which will allow you to carry more cargo or run faster, and all of these help immensely when playing alone. But it's when we move into the online realm where the game and the Strand aspect, which was spoken about pre-release, really makes itself known and adds a lot to the game. Before I elaborate on it further, one area which makes Death Stranding so memorable for me is the balance that it strikes between making the player feel so isolated and alone, but also how it makes you feel connected to other players even though there is no one else physically in the game. But the sense of emptiness along with the slower gameplay, especially in the first part of the game, will see many players turn away from it before it opens up and traveling around the world becomes easier. It takes its time, and when options finally do open up, it feels more rewarding on one hand, but on the other hand, many could also see it as a design fault to make the game so arduous, perhaps unnecessarily, and so early. The game goes for more realism in getting around its world and how players need to manage and balance their cargo, even if the amount Sam can carry is anything but realistic. But it's also the realism which will suck the fun out of the game for many players. When it comes to the online connectivity, you'll see objects and infrastructure that other players have left behind for you, which you can leave a like on, as they can with the objects that you build. And these likes, along with those from NPCs, add to your overall rating when delivering cargo. You could use ladders left behind by others as you try to scale a mountain, or use a road left behind so you can travel far easier by vehicles. This connection with other players becomes even more rewarding and welcome when you start hitting even more mountainous and snow-covered areas of the game, very, very slowly making your way up a steep slope as your feet sinking to the snow. The carrier which you can build can help especially in these sections, allowing you to offload your cargo onto it as it hovers behind you, but the real relief comes about when you spot a zipline in the distance or on a far-off peak. These allow rapid transport between two connected zip lines. A journey which could easily take over 10 minutes by foot can be travelled in mere seconds. For those dedicated players, acquiring enough materials to build an entire zipline network around the most difficult parts of the map will make life so much easier in the game, and many other players will be grateful when they see those structures ready to be used in their game. This extends to other structures as well, such as timefall shelters and generators. These shelters allow you to rest underneath them when it rains, preventing your cargo from being damaged by the acid rain. If the cargo does become damaged, then it can be sprayed with container repair spray, so it's always a good idea to have some on you just in case. Having other players help me out in my game by building generators to recharge the power skeletons or vehicles was always welcome, but these are much easier to build yourself, so the real connection you have with other players really comes about with the use of zip lines and that road network. Anything that is built will degrade over time as well, so players are able to contribute materials to keep them in tip-top shape. Death Stranding is a divisive game, but whereas this divisiveness is most often targeted at its gameplay, it really exists in several areas of the game. But the most interesting aspect of this is that for those who enjoy the various parts that make up the game, Death Stranding will become a game they not only thoroughly enjoy, it will be one that sticks with them once they've left the beaches behind. All too often these days, we finish games and move on to the next, or we plunge dozens or hundreds of hours into them, even though it never really hits the heights that we want it to. It will be memorable for each person, for all of the right or wrong reasons depending on the player. Once I had completed the main game after 75 hours of playtime, I looked back at my time with it over the coming days, and even though it had several areas I had issues with, which I'll get to, it was one of the most memorable single-player gaming experience I've had in recent years. Never having been a Kojima fan in the past, never having really enjoyed Metal Gear Solid anywhere near as much as others, I went into Death Stranding with more of a pessimistic attitude, as what I saw of the gameplay didn't excite me and Kojima's bloated storytelling of previous games didn't fill me with confidence. Death Stranding sits alongside only a handful of other games that actually made me feel emotional. Not once during my playtime was I not invested in how the story was playing out or what these characters were saying, even if the characters overall weren't entirely likable. I never found myself particularly drawn to a specific character until almost nearing the end of the game. Apart from having mostly excellent dialogue and delivery, the story itself and its different threads were so interesting, from the basic premise of delivering cargo and reconnecting the different settlements across America, to what exactly was a bridge baby, how the beaches fit into everything, and what was behind these characters and their motivations, if there was anything at all. Considering just how many things there are to keep track of in the story and the world, the writing team did a great job in making sure it all worked and was also able to be understood. There were times when the gameplay did begin to show its problems though, and where the realism and design decisions made my enjoyment go down for a time. Making a long journey, mostly on foot, across this large world, finding a way over mountains, dropping off the cargo, only to be told you have a long journey back to where you came from or nearby. There were a few times where I just needed to take a break from these long treks, so I'd put the controller down for a period and come back fresh. But other times, these long journeys were great due to that isolating feeling and the simple gameplay loop that I was involved in that was surprisingly enjoyable. As mentioned earlier, the beautiful graphics contributed greatly towards what made the experience even better, and what was incredibly memorable was that of the fantastic score that accompanies the visuals. The music of Low Roar perfectly captures what Death Stranding is, and I found myself listening to the songs when I was away from the game, even though it isn't the type of music I listen to in my free time. The songs became synonymous with Death Stranding, and Death Stranding became synonymous with those songs. For a soundtrack to not only capture what is happening on screen, but the feeling of isolation and the unknown is just incredible. The soundtrack stays with you as well, because it is only used every now and again at certain times. The music doesn't constantly play, so when it kicks in, you can't miss it. In the years to come, I'll still be hearing the Low Roar songs or the fantastic BB's theme and immediately start thinking of my time with Death Stranding. But there were also a few elements that made me scratch my head, and the most significant of those was how Monster Energy Drink was included. I don't mind in-game advertising if it's in keeping with the game world, and Monster being included wasn't ideal, but its inclusion was taken too far. When drinking it replenishes your stamina. Not only that, but it can be refilled by standing in a water source. Having it be so prominent in the game was unnecessary and wasn't in keeping with the aesthetics of the world. Combat in Death Stranding was also mostly uneventful, and I felt like it just got in the way of the other areas such as exploring and traveling around, which I much preferred. I tend to take the sneak approach in all games that offer it, so that's what I did most of the time. Sneaking around through BT or mule-infested territories and trying to avoid conflict as much as possible. Mules send out a pulse which can detect you, but this can be overcome by hitting a specific button just after it happens. But I found myself trying to avoid these camps as much as possible, as I just didn't enjoy interacting with them that much. The other problem with combat is that after the first few times of being dragged by the BTs to fight the larger enemy, apart from it offering something new and interesting, as the enemy design is pretty damn good, but after those times, I simply tried to run as far away as possible out of the black tarred area and discovered that this ended up making everything go back to normal pretty quickly. I keep reading or hearing that Death Stranding isn't a game for everyone, but that can go for every game. Explaining the premise can seem simplistic and repetitive, and that is true to a certain point, but the game offers much more when gameplay options open up. And if you're after a more slower paced game that gives you a genuine feeling of accomplishment, then Death Stranding is definitely worth playing. With its compelling, complicated but extremely interesting story and world, Death Stranding had me captivated throughout, even with the issues and problems that sometimes hindered the overall experience. At a time where the gaming industry's creations are interfered with by publishers and monetization, and many wishing Kojima had been brought into line and not given free rein to do absolutely anything he wanted, Death Stranding's greatest triumph is that a developer can create a game entirely that fits with their vision of what it's meant to be, for better or worse.